Well, we're going to get started as people log in. Uh, this webinar is sponsored by the V3 movement, which is a church plant, new community training organization. We help people start new communities of faith. And a couple things that V3 is known for is our praxis cohorts, which are a half a year journey, training, coaching, development journey with a cohort of people learning how to practice boundary crossing mission, locally rooted presence, tight knit community, and life forming discipleship. And you're trained in those four aspects and have been a part of the V3 movement for maybe 13 or 14 years now. And that is really one of our primary trainings. So I want to invite you to consider that. And we have another thing that's coming up soon that is called the Craft of Discipleship. And this is just a 5-week immersive training that is bringing together neuroscience and story formation and discipleship in how people change. And that's led by Jesse Cruikshank and David Sunday. And that's April 21st. If you're interested in how those things work out in discipleship, love to invite you to do that. And that's a really going to be a beneficial and short training to grow your competency in those areas. Well, we're together. Taeler and I are together because we're friends and really appreciate one another and have learned from one another. But we also have some similar contexts in our pastoral and planting journeys. We both planted in places where there was a lot of deconstruction happening. And I planted a church, it's been 16 years ago now, in upstate New York, one of the least church cities in the country. And deconstruction maybe was kind of before that phrase became popular, but we were facing it and experiencing it. And people weren't necessarily even using that language then. Probably wasn't until about 5 years into our pastoral work there as a plant that I started using that language to explain what people were facing. But people were facing their faith unraveling and being pulled apart in some ways. And as a pastor, I couldn't ignore that. I had to step into it and understand it and find ways to bring guidance and help and support and care to that rather than being offended by it or afraid of it. And Taeler, tell me a bit about your context in deconstruction and where and when.
Yeah, we started a church plant called Gather Tacoma about 8 years ago. And definitely at that point, like deconstruction was very much moving to the forefront of the conversation within Western American Christianity. But still a lot of tension in that conversation as well. So when we started Gather, I was really looking to experiment with how we gather as faith communities and came out of a long history of pastoring established churches that I loved and loved their worship and community, but wanted to try something new. And what we found very quickly was that the folks that were most attracted to our model, which was dinner church, house church based, were folks who had felt rejected from the established church or who had not just felt, but who had been, asked to leave or kicked out for any number of reasons. And that had led to their process of deconstruction, which they were working out as they came in to gather. And
Yeah.
I don't think we were quite
So,
prepared for that at the beginning. But
okay, yeah. So Taeler, for you felt your church was a bit of a magnet for
Mhm.
people that were already in that place.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. We got a lot of folks who had either who had come from contexts that were more conservative than we were, but also places where they just felt like their questions weren't welcomed or honored, or a
Mm,
lot of women who felt like their leadership was not welcomed or honored as well.
yes.
So they were really in the process of leaving their home churches, had started to ask
Mm,
questions about what they had been taught and what they had been taught to believe. And
yeah.
So that's what we worked out a lot at Gather
Yeah.
for years.
Yeah. I think there's some overlap in difference, and we most of the people that were is probably because of our context that were initially coming to our church hadn't been at attending church for 2, 3, 4 years. Had a faith uh, had a faith story, and at some point there was a departure, and our church kind of became a coming back moment for them,
Mm,
and but had never really had probably had a lot of existential questions that were never soothed or addressed or and so coming back there was probably some perception of safety that we offered. I didn't
right.
know that we offered that, we just weren't necessarily leading hard with, although we had significant beliefs, but leading hard with doctrine or leading with strong theological distinctives. So something about that became safe for them to attend again.
Yeah.
And it's there that I don't know if they were actually in the process of deconstruction, but they just had never had a place to actually be
That probably,
open about it.
yeah, that probably came with a lot of expectations.
Yes, yeah, certainly.
I
Yeah.
bet.
Well, yeah, I initially thought that we were going to be guiding and leading people who were really excited about the ways of Jesus. And that doesn't mean that everybody wasn't, but there was a lump in their throat when they came. So it
Mm,
was like, this is, we like Jesus, but we can't get past this. This is stuck for us. You probably know that feeling of trying to swallow something, and it's just
yeah.
and so that you shared a little bit. We didn't almost it was a surprise. We weren't ready for it. Honestly, we weren't ready. I wasn't trained in how to do deconstruction. I didn't start a church in order to address deconstruction. It was just suddenly we found ourselves swimming with people who had this lump in the throat around the Bible and Christ and pain and sovereignty. And I mean, all these things that just were not safe to talk about were stuck there for them. And that created a challenge on our leadership. Not necessarily a negative challenge, but just something we had not
Yeah.
really been prepared for. So,
I
Taylor,
figured.
tell me a bit about what initially, as you were realizing that you had people that were in deconstruction, um, what was your like? Do you know what your initial response was, and like how you first engaged with it?
Yeah, we, we my leadership team, I remember we had some conversations initially where we just suddenly realized that like one of the things we were hearing fairly regularly was like, um, this is our last attempt at Christian community. Like people would come in and they would say, so for you, it sounds like maybe people had stopped and moved away and now they were feeling called back. And for
Yeah.
us, it was like maybe they had moved and come into a new city and they were like, we're not going back to established church, but they hadn't been gone long often. Or it was
Okay.
20 somethings transitioning out of the church of their childhood and wanting something new.
Mm.
All of them, it was like, this is our last effort at Christian community. Um,
Ooh.
so if we didn't get it right, then they were
Yeah.
gone, right? That's what that felt like.
How did that? Yeah. Like, what's that? Did that bring some anxiety or pressure or like nervousness that you could do it wrong?
I think that it probably did, especially at first. I think when that started happening, it took a few months to name that. So what we saw on the
Okay.
leadership team was we noticed it, I would say, after about 6 months of seeing this happening. and sensing that we kept trying to get a formula right. Like there was something we were supposed to be doing that we weren't
Uh,
quite catching on to. And then once we named it and said,
I see.
"Oh, this is what seems to be driving us. We think we need to get something right in order to make this right for folks." That's when it clicked for us that we were
Uh,
working in something that we hadn't been expecting to. And that was
yeah,
when we realized that we were attracting a lot of folks in deconstruction, and
okay.
that wasn't going to be our responsibility. We couldn't make that right for them, right? We couldn't find
Oh,
the perfect community. We couldn't create for them within us the perfect place that was going to answer all their need. So we had to find a more authentic way of offering them
wow.
community and being okay if this wasn't the right fit for them, right?
So that, wow, that's, yeah, Taylor, that, so it took you some time to come to terms with that you couldn't do it right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Our leaders, I remember one conversation in particular, and this was actually a few years in because it's a process to figure
Yeah.
out what you're doing. But at one point, one of our leaders said, "I feel like we're running a triage center, and
Mm,
we're just constantly trying to address these deep open wounds and
yeah.
address them immediately in an emergency fashion." And
Uh,
it's taking so much energy, and we can't do other things, right?
um,
And
yes.
so once
Yes.
we identified that, we started making a move to what we called our greenhouse, that we didn't feel called to be a triage center, but we still want
Mm,
that people are hurt and need a place to grow and heal. And so we said,
yes.
we need to think about how do we make a greenhouse where people can
Mm,
nurture,
yes.
heal, and grow, but where it's just one component of the Gather ecosystem. It's not the whole thing or the main landing pad, right?
Okay, that's really helpful, Taylor. That's and that connects with our learnings was that initially there was deconstruction was so present and visceral and real that we, I think, out of naivete or ignorance, thought, okay, we need to center this
Mm-hmm.
in our church, and I think that was a born out of some compassion and um, but it ultimately became too much. It dominated our the very reason we were together, um, and the hospital, like the way we were being engaged with was we're this is a hospital and something needs to get fixed. And um, no one would use that language, obviously, but that was how the culture was shaped for the first few years of our church, um, and that was just because we thought we had to center deconstruction because it was on everyone's kind of tongue.
Mm.
Um, you had a meeting where you started to realize there needed to be a shift, or we needed to engage with this from a different posture.
Right. Yeah, it sounds like actually, even though we were probably drawing from two different segments of the deconstruction population, right? You from folks that had gone and wanted to
Yeah,
come back, and me from folks that were not quite gone, but trying to give it a last shot. It sounds like we actually ended up in very much the same place, doesn't it?
yeah,
With
yeah,
deconstruction at the center, and then trying to figure out how we don't make it the center of all things, because that's such a heavy,
yeah,
it's just, it burns your leader
yeah,
fast. Um,
yeah,
but
yeah.
yeah, we did. We initially, one of the ways that we saw, well, go ahead, Dan.
Quick pause, Taylor. If you have questions, we're going to do some Q&A at the end of this. You can drop in the Q&A function any questions that come up for you and like for us to engage with them. So back to Taylor.
Yeah. Um, I think maybe one of the things that has been helpful as I've had this conversation with church planters who might find themselves in the same place is to kind of identify when this is happening. Because I don't know about you, Dan, but like it came to the center and became the center thing for us without me knowing.
Yeah.
So like it just suddenly it was like, wow, this is what we're all about now because it's so important, right?
Yes.
And because the need is so great and you want to honor that.
Yeah.
And and so, we found that in the early days, as we got people who had a lot of really important and good questions, it was like, okay, we're going to pop up a study on this. We're going to do this book. We're going to, open this
Mm,
conversation. Um, but one
yeah.
thing just led to the next. There wasn't a lot of resolution necessarily. And so once we had
Mm,
that discussion, we started talking about how do we not just help people, deconstruct, but really help them reconstruct, right? That the next step of
yeah.
deconstruction or the co-step of deconstruction is reconstruct,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yes.
You want to do
Yeah.
this?
Yeah, Taylor, I don't know if it sounds like there's some discovery that we can get stuck or caught or like dead end in deconstruction. And um, we found that a little bit was that um, everyone is hurting. And so when you're in a stage of hurting around how the church has treated you, legitimately has treated you poorly, a leader has hurt you, the Bible has been used for things that are violent and abusive. Um, it takes some time to work through those. It takes some time to walk through those, and um, when there's not space for that,
Mhm.
um, you're still bleeding.
Yep.
You're still hemorrhaging. You're still bleeding, and we found that in the early years of our church, really around year three, there was just so much bleeding. There was just our gatherings were just filled with so much pain and anger and hurt that we in some sense got stuck in that stage together, and we didn't know how to relationally and therapeutically start to like address how to heal and whatever reconstruction was for us, because the culture became dominated by that. So it actually became a little bit uncool,
Mm,
uncool to uh, mention or speak about anything that would be reparative or
right.
possible, or a pivot. And that's when we realized, okay, this is we're kind of still we're what we're doing in our community right now is just picking at scabs, and there is a place for just being able to sit with your wounds without having to be told you need to heal right away. There
Sure.
has to be that. There has to be that. So you can't rush somebody towards healing. But I think that it was in the wrong container. Um,
Mm,
our container of our regular worship gathering, it was not the best spot for that
right.
messy work. Um, Part of me felt some guilt actually that I didn't, well, our team didn't feel like it was healthy to make that the primary container. Did you feel any guilt,
Uh,
like
uh,
shepherding guilt?
can I can I answer that question by asking you a little bit more
Yeah,
about
you
your
can.
guilt?
I like to ask the questions. You can ask me
Tell me
questions.
about your guilt, Dan. What so so it sounds like this was challenging some of your assumptions as a pastor, about what
Yeah.
it means to pastor. What was that like? Can you name what those assumptions were if you think about it?
Yeah, I certainly the my assumption, well, some of it comes out of my own story of being hurt, um, borderline abused by a leader. And so when I started this church, I believed, told myself, this will be a church that never hurts anybody ever again. This, no one will get hurt here,
Oh,
like I got hurt. Um, and that, you know, that that's impossible.
yeah. That's just not in your power.
No, it's not in my power. There was a lot of over functioning in that came about. So over functioning as a shepherd, over functioning and um, just being more preventative than proactive. I was living in the negative, right? As a leader, like I just don't want this place to not be something.
Yeah.
And so my paradigm of a shepherd actually um,
Mhm.
was broken. Some of that's because I hadn't experienced all the healing that I needed to do, but it was reactivity. And I think out of, when you're hurt, you don't want someone else to get hurt. And so I thought I had the control and power to create a space that would never do that. And so there was also, I think, some need to be seen that way. I wanted our church to be seen in a very particular light as a place for people that didn't feel like they belonged anywhere. And so even that is some image management, is like
Mhm. Sure.
trying so hard to appear in a way that you really don't have control over and can pull you into a whole lot of um, it and not having healthy boundaries, because to say no would be to hurt someone, or to say we can't do that would be to possibly reject someone. And so our first 3 years of church planning work was just lots of over functioning and giving away parts of ourselves that we didn't even know we were giving away. But that's really in reaction to this uh, abuse of what a shepherd was supposed to look like.
Right.
So I don't I don't know if you were intending to have some for me to be on the therapy couch there, but that
Sorry.
was yeah.
That's super helpful though, because I think actually that really gets to uh, understanding the individual ways we might be responding as leaders, how our
Yes.
like individual perspectives and giftings, even the
Hmm.
shadow side of those might in
Yes.
how we operate.
Yes.
'Cause as I hear you talk, I think about how like one of my own assumptions was that I could teach people out of deconstruction. I'm a teacher. That's one of my top,
Uh,
APEST and so on. And so there was a big part of me that thought if I just gave them the right information, right? Like if
I
they had
see.
access, then it would solve their problem or somehow heal them. And that wasn't any truer for me than your,
Wow.
assumption was for you.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm a shepherd and on the fivefold. That's my number one. And so my the shadow side is that I think I have the power to shepherd people out of the place that they're in if I shepherd enough.
Right. Yeah. And if I teach well
And
enough.
yeah, yes, yes. And so you hit a wall where you realize that you're not the hero, and it can either humble you, or it can, you know, make you persistent. So for you, you had a moment of believing you could teach people out of deconstruction. What's it
Sure.
like? What was it like to realize not enough teaching was going to do it?
Oh, um, you know, I I actually it was I wish it had been true. Like it would have been far easier if you could just teach someone out of deconstruction, right? Wouldn't that be easier for all of us? So there was definitely a part of me that was like, man, I really wish that had happened, and could happen that way because that'd be a lot easier than
Yeah.
what we're doing now. But at the same
Mm,
time, it was really freeing right? Because
Okay.
I didn't,
Mm.
I had no uh, right to bear that responsibility. And
Yes.
and it just wasn't healthy for me either. And it wasn't healthy for
Yeah.
them. But it was also freeing because what we found was creating that teaching, just like shepherding, being pastored and learning are still parts of deconstruction and reconstruction.
Yes.
They're not the magic switch that's going to flip somebody from one to the other or suddenly heal
Yes.
something, pain, but they're still a part of that journey. And so
Yes.
it was
Yes.
freeing to find ways in which people could be equipped and to learn themselves, right?
Yeah.
Through
Yes. That's good. Taylor, you and I both engage deconstruction with a similar warmth and openness to it. It doesn't threaten us, and we've both had our own seasons of some deconstruction. Is that
Yeah, I mean, I think
true?
a lot of that for me came early on when I had to leave my very first ever church because I came to Christ as a teenager, and then
Mm.
um, as a young woman with
Yeah.
leadership calling that wasn't welcomed in that atmosphere, but that sent me out of the church as a whole for over a year. And so,
Mm.
I have a real tenderness for folks who have made that journey, who have left in some way,
Yes.
but also wanted to come back in some way. Um,
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Similar. I'm not similar in that I'm a woman, but the deconstruction sent me into the wilderness for a season, and but it ultimately at the end of that wilderness, the longing to belong again to a faith community and belong to Christ. It was just I couldn't get rid of that. Um, not that I think I was trying to figure out if I could get rid of that for a season. Was it
mm,
possible to do faith without people and without any kind of loyalty to Jesus? Like, is it possible to get rid of those things? And ultimately, at the end, I realized I can't. My soul is built for those, and so my returning. This is probably why I don't look at deconstruction as a faith killer. It actually uh, it brought some minimalism and it brought the right things to the center rather than the being on the periphery. So the when someone is in deconstruction, and our church had 10 or 15 handfuls of people in deconstruction at any moment. Um, I think part of their psychology was like, is this a bad place I'm in?
right.
Am I in danger? Do you see me as in danger? And so how do you communicate? How do you build space that this is not a death sentence for faith. This is not a graveyard for faith. There's how do you help people feel it's part of possibly their discipleship is experiencing deconstruction? Was there ways that you did that, communicated that?
I think that first, with so much empathy, right? I mean, even
Yes.
as we say some of those sentences, you can watch my face go, oh, man, yes, I feel so
Mm,
much for folks who ask that question. Am I in danger? Am I, what's the risk here? I feel so much empathy for them
yes.
feeling that, right?
Yes.
So really starting from that place of empathy and humility that like it's not my job to to suddenly to tell them how they're going to be all right or exactly what to do, but it is my job to
Yeah.
walk alongside them. And I think
Yes.
there are two perspectives that have been really helpful to me personally and even within our faith community as we have moved this from the center of our community to a greenhouse. One is that
Mm,
like I feel like I had that really pivotal moment as a young adult in leaving the church as a whole and coming back that gives me some way of understanding what many people are going through. But I have also deconstructed along the way many times over. There have been
Sure.
many points in my life where I have had to wrestle with a belief that I had early on.
Hmm.
It's changed
Hmm.
as I was growing. So for all of us to expect that deconstruction and is happening in the course of our faith life, right? Um,
Yes.
and then also opening up really the history of Christianity and theology has been so
Yes.
helpful for us. So you've
Mm.
heard me talk in the past, Dan, about, like we created a group that we call Zateo that is in its fourth year now. And the
Hmm.
start of that group was to create a space where people could wrestle with some of these big, difficult questions in a guided way together.
Yeah.
And a part of our liturgy for that asks the people who are leading that to share the scope of Christian historical thought on this subject.
Mm.
I found right away
Mm.
people going, oh, I'm reacting to the last 200 years of Christian theology that
Ah,
I was given. But actually,
yes.
I go 600 years back or 1,000 years back
Ah,
behind
yes, yes,
on the Christian timeline with other
yes,
folks who believed similarly to where I'm at, or they have a perspective that I haven't heard yet that helps me
yes,
that I still exist within this community of Christian
yeah. So
community.
there needs to be an ecumenical friendliness, because if you are your only resource is, the Christianity, the one expression of Christianity that um, probably is more dominant here in the West in the last couple hundred years. Um, it becomes really difficult to figure out, is there any hook I can hang my faith on that's not this? And so you did some historical, you helped open up the world of church history and all the beautiful, diverse, wild expressions of that.
Yeah, which sounds a lot like trying to teach your way out of deconstruction. I'm just gonna say,
Sure.
but the
Yeah.
difference being, like, I don't for I helped to start and lead that for the first few months, and then we made
Yeah.
it accessible enough for the people who were in it to pick that up and learn themselves, right? And then share that with the group as a whole. So it wasn't always me as a person
Yes.
in authority handing down this information, right? But
So
rather
this group, what is it called again?
call it Zateo.
Is was a kind of a greenhouse space for those who are in deconstruction or curious about, like, it. You had this safe kind of demarcated space to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And was that was in parallel to your worship gathering? Was it outside your worship gathering? Was it like
Yeah.
where did it exist?
It became what we would call one of our micro communities because we also
Yep.
only take 12 people in that group on any given. We run it once a month. We only take 12. Um,
Yes.
and we have we probably have 20 or 30 people that have come in and out of that group. So on any given month that we run it, 12 of that group might come.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yep. Yep.
Um, but it provides a reliable space where folks know that they can start to wrestle
Yes.
with some of these questions.
Yes.
Um,
That's good.
and it runs
Yep.
alongside our Sunday morning or afternoon offering and our kids' church and things like that.
Yeah. That's really good. That we did something similar. So that was after learning some things the hard way, but we created this uh, like an incubator
Mhm.
um, that was for people who don't sense they can walk in confidence in their faith yet,
Mhm.
whatever that means. That's what an incubator is for, right? It's for, like, and it's not bad to be in an incubator. It's a it's a liminal space of warmth and care. And we would have people that were didn't come to our worship gathering, but actually were in the incubator space for a year, sometimes more, and other people who were in our worship gathering and then were in the incubator space. And um, some of this comes down to social contracts. Taylor, if you're familiar with that,
Mm.
is like we have these unsaid social contracts of what should be happening in a space, or who I am in this space, or who we are together in this space. They're often unsaid, unspoken. Um, in deconstruction, it's really, really frustrating to be in a people space and think there's a social construct that my questions and my explorations will be dealt with here. Then you have other people in the room who are their social construct is this is a place for people who are convinced that Christ is it, and we want to live on mission together. And so there's two different social contracts kind of colliding in that space. And this kind of clarity is really important to have spaces where the social contract is like obvious and we state it and we name it so that people can go,
Uh-huh.
I know where I am, and this and what I have right now belongs here, rather than trying to interpret and figure out, you know, can I challenge this idea, or is this like acceptable here? And um, so a lot of my work around deconstruction is like helping people really, rather than being in denial about social contracts, it's like to
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in that particular space that I mentioned, for example, like we have a statement that is read at the beginning of that gathering that says
mm,
outlines the social contract for that space, how we are going to hold space together.
yeah,
And that's super helpful for everybody to have those agreements right at the beginning and to know the expectation. And
yes,
where we have primary leaders of that group and what I would say are secondary leaders of the group. So the primary leaders who host and teach the others, disciple the others, and how to then hold that space. And the
mm,
primary leaders are really good at being able to name when something is going awry, right? In a gentle way and to call people.
yeah,
But the other part that we really practice there is to name our experiences as opposed to other people's experiences.
okay.
So, so people.
Help me with that. So yeah, help me with that. What do you?
So really what we're practicing there is saying, like we might bring up a topic that's really difficult for folks, say something like eternal conscious torment, right? Something that
Yeah.
divides a lot of people. And for people to have a chance to say, one, this was my experience of this from the beginning.
Uh,
This is
yeah.
this is how this has impacted my life. So many people have been hurt by people who told them, they were going to hell or, whatever it is, however
Sure.
you analyze it. These are the questions I have about it as a next step, right? These are the questions about how this has, what difference this makes, and so all
Mm,
of these things are framed from their personal point of view, so
I
that
see.
people aren't making theological statements on behalf of everybody,
Ah,
right? And then
yes.
when we treat that, we
Mhm.
have to respond to that as the person sitting across the table from us, not as this theological construct,
Right. Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that's really different.
Yeah.
You have to respond to the person sitting,
Yes.
and you can respond
Yeah.
with a lot more gentleness and openness, and
Mm,
because this idea, this disembodied idea, is now an actual person.
person. That's good. Taylor, you that the framing of that and the what you're inviting people into, you is that in like a do you do you have like an opening session and kind of how do you get those how do you help people orient to how to be here and engage like that?
Yeah, people are invited into that group. So that group is
Okay.
personal invitation only. It's not, we don't advertise it as open to the public
Yeah.
in general. So a
Okay.
lot of the orientation for it happens through personal invitation. And when
Yes.
people first come, we invite them to do a lot more listening than anything else. And that's just a first invitation.
Yeah.
Don't, it's good for people to spend a lot of time listening their first time as opposed to talking or sharing their first time. And from that point on, it is a guided, we use a guide every time we meet. And so it's
Yeah.
a guided liturgy of 4 parts that they're taken through. And it's the same every single month. The topic is just different. So they get
Yes.
to know that, how to walk through that liturgy together.
Beautiful. That's good. Can I ask you another question? Unless you had a question for me. Yeah, I know I could just keep coming at
I
questions. So the you're the way you're particularly you're situated in a church plant, and so what the inertia of a church plant is to uh, galvanize together to create something beautiful in our neighborhood. And did you find that it's hard for people to galvanize or like get on mission or want to even participate or offer their contribution or serve anything that would require um, some medium to low level to high sacrifice? Was it hard for people in deconstruction to want to do that when they are in the place that they're in?
Yeah, I have found that that's been difficult. I mean, I would not expect people in most stages of deconstruction to gather around kind of the primary mission of a church plant to
Yeah.
bring Jesus love into the community as a whole, or be practicing welcoming people to know who Jesus is more. Those things can be really triggering. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily anticipate people getting on board with that right away because they're still relearning a lot of that themselves, right?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
if
You go ahead.
the mission isn't of that church plant isn't to reach people in deconstruction, right? But you are just naturally receiving people in deconstruction, as so often happens.
Yes.
They certainly get on board quickly with things like serving the most vulnerable, and so having
Yes.
opportunities for them to work that out, right, in service to others, uh,
Yes.
is, I think, really important.
Yeah. One of the expectations that I had and had to let go of
Mhm.
was that if we were a church of people in deconstruction, then everybody would want to get in the game um, around our mission. And um, I actually found the opposite is
Mm,
that um, the the energy that was going out towards their own questions and struggle and hurt and what was still triggering um, created a depth like a just a low fuel for wanting to engage with the mission of the church. And I found myself frustrated that you're in deconstruction and we're providing space for you. How come you're not
mm,
moving out of a passive posture or more receiving posture into a more contributing posture? And so that was that was an expectation I had that I never named, but realized I was looking at people in deconstruction with that. We're trying to build a church plant. How come you're
you're
not
not.
you're not helping? The and I think some resentment settled in fairly early, around year 3 or 4 of just um, of that mismatch of my expectations and their capacity. And did you have any of that where you
And
had
I want that
expectations
question,
that,
and I have a
but
question.
okay,
Um, yeah, no,
you don't
um,
have to have the same. I was just curious if,
yeah, I think that within the Gather ecosystem, especially, one of the things is in the second half of our life together that has become really important, and I think grew out of. I think we would, if we had our Gather folks here in this room, they would probably agree with a lot of what you just said and say, yeah, that's actually true. In our early years, we had high expectations for how people participated in specific ways. Post-COVID,
hmm,
that changed radically for us. Um,
okay,
and we reoriented around rest as a starting
yeah,
place. And so we did a
hmm,
lot of work
hmm,
to continue to just beat that drum of rest and Sabbath as a
yes,
primary foundation for everybody, whether you're in deconstruction or not. Like, this is the starting place for everyone when we can find our identity to such an extent in the love of God that allows us and wants us to rest and enjoy Sabbath.
yes,
Like, that's where
yes,
all their work comes from. And really, nothing needs to be done that isn't done from that starting point of rest and Sabbath. Um,
yes.
so that's
That's
been
that's good. I wish we had tuned
so
into that
we could do a
earlier.
whole other
That's
webinar
really
on
good.
that. But that is
Yes.
part of my question for you, for us. That is that practice and that rhythm is what came
Mhm.
out of that learning.
Mm,
What rhythms and practices were helpful to you as you figured out what those expectations were?
yeah. Well, certainly the took me a couple years of soaking in some resentment and frustration and over functioning to realize that if this was going to be sustainable, then um, I
Mhm.
needed to I needed to change my relationship with its outcome,
Mhm.
and that was in the forms of rest and boundaries. And I read Henry Now. I think it was at that point. Yeah, it was right there. I read Henry Nouwen's book, The Living Presence,
Mhm.
which was his last book he wrote around the ministry of absence, um,
Mhm.
and which is the ministry of not being there, which sounds heretical to or egregious to some people. But Henry Nouwen wrote a book around the ministry of not being there and not always being available and not being the hero and not being present at everything. And, and that was a completely new concept to me because I think I had worshiped the ministry of presence to a point of having a hero complex around if I was present and I did the thing, then somehow I could bring transformation. I had to actually start embracing, oh, am I not on screen? Sorry.
Your screen.
Um, okay, a ministry of absence. So I just started getting clear
Mhm.
about where I would not be and saying no and not seeing that as a statement of cruelty, but as a actually a healthy. The reason that Henry Nouwen explored that was because he realized he was filling the space of the spirit. He was
Mhm.
filling in the gap. He was the spirit for most people, and that was an inappropriate relationship he was forming with hurting people. And so that was for me. That was around year 5 that I realized it was unsustainable, and I had to embrace rest and engage with this invitation of absence. Which
Mhm.
even now, when I say it, someone sounds like that's a horrible shepherd. But um, we've got a couple minutes here, and we got a really good question. Can I throw this at you, Taylor? And I'll engage as well.
Yeah.
Um, as you engage people in their personal deconstruction journey, did you come to a place as a leader where church community where you needed to do some deconstruction as well, and that your faith community needed to be reconstructed and reimagined in some ways? If so, could you provide some examples of that? So he's talking about you're leading people in deconstruction, but then you discover that there's some deconstruction that you are experiencing or need to face.
Mhm.
And then how did that, how did you, yeah,
Yeah.
what happened?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yes. The answer to that is definitely.
Yeah.
And still to always. I mean, I'm finding that for myself regularly, because my experience with the folks that I am doing life with changes me,
Mm,
right? I mean,
hmm.
that's just the process of change. I think to be specific, some of the ways that I found that happening for me were, well, going back to like, are you on the mission with us kind of thinking early on,
Yeah.
I remember feeling pretty judgmental of some of my folks who were part of Gather, but then like attending other churches on the side because they
Mm,
really
mm,
wanted that worship style experience and things like that.
I
Um,
see.
and I remember having a conversation with a friend who was like, "What do you care what they do on Sunday mornings? They're not even doing anything." And I was like, "Yes, absolutely. I sit corrected.
Yeah.
You were right." But that was a learning to me later when I actually started experiencing some of those that same missing and longing. And I was like, "Oh,
Mm,
so many of us have grown for many years in this one context that has been very meaningful to us. Of course, we're going to long uh,
mm,
for things from there." Um,
yeah,
yeah, and so I definitely went through a season as a church planter where I thought, "Oh, this is the only way I'll ever do church ever,"
I
and
see.
came back to pastoring the
Mm,
churches or traditional worship services as well as
hmm.
planting like that. And so I
Yeah.
had a process of deconstruction about how we worship and how we gather, even as I was
Yes.
creating new ways of worshiping and gathering for our particular community.
That's great. Yeah. That's an unexpected
Now,
change. Yeah. Because you were in some sense, maybe a little bit in reaction to some of those worship expressions and then realized um, there's some goodness and beautiful there that needed to be reconstructed.
absolutely. Yeah. How
That's
about
good.
you?
Yeah, I think for me, my primary I experienced a deconstruction many years before, and so a lot of my theological shifts had already occurred, and then I had time to kind of rebuild them.
Mhm.
Um, but mine was probably more about the modes of church
Mm,
than the theological distinctives. So, um, and the primary one was preaching. Absolutely
right.
was preaching. So I did have, I doubt, some like worship, idol worship around being the church with the preacher who preached the message, preached just as good as the conservative reformed preacher, but I preached the message that was much more grace and love and the way of Jesus. And I would do that in such a way that it would go viral.
Mhm.
I think back then Rob Bell was huge, and there's a few others, and so there was that kind of imitation of. So I was just going to take my preaching gift and kind of shift it and grow a large church based upon communication. And it was within 3 years of our church that I really started to deconstruct the preaching act as I thought it, and and started to explore what I call dialogical preaching, which is incorporating dialogue in the midst of the preaching act.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't realize that that fascination and experimentation would actually deconstruct me as wanting to be the person that was holding the mic
Uh-huh.
I wanted to bring the breakthrough. I wanted to be the master teacher. I wanted to be seen as brilliant. And I didn't know any of that stuff was attached to my preaching gift, but it was. And so the moment I started introducing some little bits and pieces of dialogue in Sunday morning gathering, not in a small group, but actually in the gathering, it really challenged my ego. Um, and so that was a shift for our church. Also, people that were coming initially because Dan's a great communicator
Mhm.
left, were disappointed and left because they didn't sign up for that. And then I was dealing with like not meeting people's expectations
Yeah.
so for me it was mostly the modes of how to be the church. And I'm not necessarily saying that there's only one way to preach, but for me that was something that started to get pulled apart, was that I thought I could just be a better version of a bad message. And
Do you know what's so interesting about that, Dan? Because you and I have talked a lot about dialogical preaching, and I've learned a lot from you about
yes.
dialogical preaching.
Mm,
That
yes.
act of dialogical preaching, like the intention is to leave space for the Spirit to be working among the people, to
Yes.
honor the fact that the Spirit has already been working among them, and then to
Yes.
create that space together with the power of the Spirit. And so
Yes.
when I hear you then talk about the ministry of absence, that that
Oh.
dialogical preaching is the ministry of absence in preaching form.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never made that connection, but it's really, that's a, I didn't realize I was eating up all the space in my preaching
Right.
and not, my theology of the priesthood of believers was actually, I always had that theology, but I hadn't actually lived that theology. So believing that was creating space for the Spirit to speak through other people. So good stuff. This is great, Taylor. We're at the end already, and we could go all day long about what we've been learning and learning about ourselves and a space that, what it means to have a congregation that engages deconstruction. Thanks to everybody for participating and being here. And this is going to be record. This has been recorded and will be sent out as a replay so that you have it later if you need it for a restore, so you want to share it with somebody. But blessings to you all. Thanks, Taylor. Have a good. You're at morning, and I'm at afternoon. I'm getting late afternoon, so
Go start
enjoy
my
the
day.
day. Yeah. Peace to you.
Bye.
Bye bye.